Senator McDonald. Senator Ketter.
Thank you very much, Mr Acting Deputy President, and I want to use my time in Senator's statements for a very practical purpose of alerting working families who rely on childcare that the system is about to change and their payments may well be at risk. So I want to thank anybody listening. I want to place on record my serious concerns about the Turnbull government's changes to our childcare system. Putting aside the fact that thousands of vulnerable Australians will be worse off after the 1st of July, and I'll come back to that, Labor is worried that the way in which the changes are being implemented would cause hardship for families around the country. The onus has been placed squarely on parents and caregivers to contact Centrelink to transition to the new system, and the government has largely left it to those childcare centres to follow up with families and support them through the transition. Unfortunately, despite the good work of thousands of proactive centres across Australia, we know that hundreds of thousands of families are yet to complete the new paperwork. Now, the Minister tried to dress up these numbers in this place yesterday, talking about how many families have signed up, but he failed to mention that 23%, or around 275,000 families, are yet to sign up. That's around 1 in 4, and the deadline is imminent. Now, what does this mean for families? Parents and caregivers who have not yet transitioned should urgently visit the my.gov.au website or visit a local Centrelink office. Unfortunately, those who fail to complete the new paperwork will risk losing their subsidies from the 1st of July. And of course it will be the childcare facilities that have to help pick up the pieces, dealing with confused and anxious families who can't afford to pay their bills and may not understand why. Or worse, dealing with families who don't realise their subsidy has been cut until their childcare fees are direct debited that week. Families who live paycheck to paycheck, where every dollar counts. Now, without a subsidy, those families might see their grocery money disappear and be left with literally nothing to live on. And I'm very worried about the impact of these changes on families. And I don't believe the government has done enough to support families through this transition. As I said, they've essentially left it to childcare operators to tell families about the changes. And we've heard nothing from the government on how long it will take Centrelink to process each family's transition. Given the blowout in Centrelink payment processing times, the wait times on phone calls and the volumes of calls that simply go unanswered, I am not brimming with confidence about families getting timely results from Centrelink under a coalition government ever. And I return now to the issue of families who will be further disadvantaged by the Turnbull government's changes. Under these changes, access to early childhood education will be cut for around 1 in 4 families across the country. Access will be cut for over 62,000 families in Queensland alone. Amanda Rishworth, Labor's Shadow Minister for Early Childhood Education and Development, was in Queensland recently, and I thank her for visiting my duty electorate of Petrie. Unfortunately, I was required in Canberra for estimates that week, so I sent my apologies to the Good Start Early Learning Centre in Rothwell. And I thank them very much for hosting the Shadow Minister and our federal Labor candidate for Petrie, Corinne Mulholland. I look forward to visiting one of the great Good Start centres across Petrie at another time in the future. But I know Corinne Mulholland has been very active in campaigning against these Liberal national cuts, and she's out there every day talking with local mums and dads about the affordability and accessibility of our childcare system, while the Liberal member for Petrie stays silent on the issue. Now, Labor has a very proud record when it comes to supporting parents back into the workforce and advancing early childhood education. We have a proud record of making childcare more affordable to parents and caregivers. It was the Whitlam government who took on the implementation of the Childcare Act 1972. And in 1974, the Whitlam government broadened funding to include preschools and childcare support for all families, not just for the poor. And I note the assertion from Brennan and Wales and Brennan and Adamson, published by Samsia Natal at the Australasian Journal of Early Education in December 2013, that said, and I quote, "Both the Act and the Whitlam era have been identified as a turning point in childcare politics." Then from 83 to 87, under the Hawke Labor government, the Commonwealth worked with states and territories to expand the childcare system, together with funding capital development and around 20,000 places. In 1984, childcare assistance was introduced and a more needs-based planning approach to places adopted. In 1986, Labor put caps on fees that facilities could charge. And in 1988, the National Childcare Strategy was announced, aimed at providing an extra 30,000 childcare places. In our last term of government, we raised the cap on the childcare rebate, enabling more parents and caregivers to participate more fully in the workforce without being penalised by fees, and facilitating more time for other parents to look for work or study. And I'm also proud of the fact that Labor works hand in hand with the union movement to fight for fairer wages and good conditions for early childhood workers and educators. I want to particularly acknowledge the efforts of the Big Steps campaign run by United Voice, pushing for fair pay for fair work by workers in childcare facilities across the country. My wife re-entered the workforce when our kids were young, and I'm, as a father of 4, could not have achieved all that we have achieved in our family without the support of early childhood educators. We entrust our children to these workers in some of their most formative developmental years, and we know that the transformative power that education has, even just regular reading, provides for our children. And Labor recognises that quality early education and care can only be provided by a skilled, professional and well-paid workforce. We don't think it's right that those who educate our youngest minds earn less than half the national wage. So in conclusion, right now big business profits are hitting record high, but workers' wages are standing still. Inequality is increasing and the gender gap has never been more obvious. The ABC reported earlier this month that for the first time in recorded history, less than half of all working Australians have a permanent full-time job with leave entitlements. The cost of living pressures are hurting families, and Labor recognises that it can be an incredibly difficult decision for families weighing up the pros and cons of returning to work and putting a child into care. We've heard information about effective marginal tax rates in the past couple of weeks in the debate about personal income tax cuts. We've heard about how the cost of childcare contributes to effective marginal tax rates, can act as a significant disincentive to parents re-entering the workforce. Yet this government does nothing to address these issues, and they have form when it comes to neglecting issues facing our early education workforce. So, Mr. President, just in conclusion, this government has done a number of things. They've allowed the early years workforce strategy to expire, abolished long-day care professional development program, they ended funding for professional support coordinators. Now they're cutting access to early childhood education and care for some of the most disadvantaged and vulnerable parents and children in the country. The last thing we should be doing for these families is further entrenching the cycle of disadvantage, but that's exactly what the Liberal Nationals are doing. Now more than ever, we need a federal Labor government to support families and children by getting the policy settings right. Labor will make sure that early childhood education takes priority over tax cuts to big business. Labor will make sure our educators and our workers are valued. Labor will ensure that our childcare system supports our most vulnerable children and families to reap the benefits that we know early childhood education can offer. So just in closing, just want to remind people to go to my.gov.au website or visit their local Centrelink office.
Order. Senator Ketter.